Zorp scrolled through the historical archives with increasing dismay. Each new document reinforced his initial hypothesis. Humans were, without question, the most irrational species to ever achieve spaceflight. Computer, display, event, category. Warfare, 20th century. He commanded, his forefinger hand gesturing precisely at the holographic interface. The display shifted to show images that made his inner membranes contract in distress. 2 global conflicts within 3 decades. He dictated into his personal research log. Development of weapons specifically designed to destroy planetary biospheres. Multiple near-extinction events triggered by their own technology. He paused the scroll at an image of a mushroom cloud. And yet they survived. Inexplicably. The laboratory aboard the research vessel, the analyzer, was silent except for the soft whirring of environmental systems and the occasional beep from Zorp's console. The Xylosians and a sociologist had been at this for hours, his tall, slender frame hunched over the workstation, large eyes blinking methodically as he processed the information. Computer, display category, entertainment and recreation, 21st century. The images shifted to a chaotic display of humans engaged in various activities. Zorp's upper ridges furrowed. Subject species voluntarily consumes neurotoxins for pleasure, he noted, observing footage of humans drinking coffee and eating spicy foods. They derive entertainment from witnessing simulated distress of other humans. The screen showed reality television competitions. They build digital platforms specifically to argue with strangers and display curated falsehoods about their lives. Zorp's normally cool, analytical demeanor faltered. He experienced an uncomfortable sensation that his species rarely encountered, genuine bewilderment. I cannot derive a logical pattern, he admitted to his log. The human species appears to be an evolutionary error, a species that somehow stumbled into spaceflight while maintaining psychological frameworks better suited to primitive savanna existence. The laboratory door slid open with a soft hiss. Glix, the Vorgan pilot, entered with characteristic efficiency. The Vorgan were known throughout the galaxy for their stoicism and precision, qualities that made them excellent pilots and terrible conversationalists. Course adjustment complete, Glix reported, his leathery face showing no emotion. We maintain observation orbit as instructed. The ship's systems are functioning at 99.7% efficiency. He paused, seemingly having exhausted his interest in conversation. Thank you, Glix, Zorp replied. I am continuing my preliminary assessment of the subject species. The findings are troubling. Glix glanced at the holographic display showing humans engaged in something called extreme sports. Inefficient locomotion methods, he observed flatly. High risk for minimal gain. The door opened again, and this time the massive frame of Borp, their Grok engineer, filled the entrance. The gentle giant had to duck to enter the laboratory, his stone-like skin scraping slightly against the door frame. Hello, friends, Borp rumbled, his voice like rocks rolling down a hillside. The quantum drive is purring like a satisfied earthling cat creature. Unlike most of his species, Borp had a curious fascination with metaphor and emotional expressions. It made him an oddity among Groks, but a valuable member of a research team studying emotional species. Borp, perhaps you can offer insight, Zorp said, gesturing to the screen. I'm attempting to categorize human behavioral patterns, but they resist logical classification. They deliberately seek discomfort. They consume substances that cause pain. They form intense social bonds with strangers based on arbitrary geographical or cultural markers. The massive Grok moved closer, peering at the displays with small, kind eyes embedded in his rocky face. Humans have interesting, emotional structures, Borp offered hesitantly. Not like Xylosians or Vorgans. More like a storm, changing, moving, mixing. Zorp's inner membranes fluttered with irritation. That's not a scientific classification, Borp. I need data, patterns, something I can include in my report to the Galactic Union. Perhaps direct observation would yield more comprehensive data, Glix suggested unexpectedly. Both Zorp and Borp turned to look at the Vorgan pilot, surprised by the unsolicited input. As if on cue, the ship's communications system chimed. Incoming transmission from Galactic Union Research Division announced the ship's AI. The holographic display shifted to show the stern face of senior researcher Clax, Zorp's superior. Researcher Zorp, the Union Council has reviewed your preliminary reports on human integration into galactic society. Clax began without preamble. Your observations about their chaotic and potentially dangerous behavior patterns are noted. The Council has authorized a direct observation mission. Zorp straightened. Thank you, senior researcher. I will prepare a suitable urban observation protocol. No, Clax interrupted. The Council specifically wants observation of humans in their most unpredictable social environment. You are to observe a location designated by human anthropologists as an apex of unpredictability in human social structures. Zorp blinked rapidly in confusion. Which would be? A drinking establishment, Clax replied. Specifically, an establishment located in the frontier colony on Proxima B7, known as the Dusty Asteroid, is frequented by humans from various subcultures and professional backgrounds. Zorp felt his inner membranes constrict. A drinking establishment? Where they voluntarily ingest consciousness-altering ethanol solutions. In groups? Precisely, Clax confirmed. The Council believes this will provide the most comprehensive data on human behavior in its least inhibited state. Your team is to use basic morphological modifiers to blend in, observe, and report. Direct interaction should be minimized. After the transmission ended, Zorp turned to his crew members, his research appendages trembling slightly. We are going to observe humans in a frontier colony bar, he announced, his tone suggesting he'd rather study microbes on a garbage planet. Glix merely nodded, accepting the mission parameters without comment. Borp, however, broke into what appeared to be a smile. Though with his rocky features, it looked more like a landslide. I have read about these places, the Grok said eagerly. They have music, and stories, and sometimes breaking of furniture. Zorp's inner membranes fluttered with anxiety. This is a scientific mission, Borp, not an opportunity for cultural immersion. He turned back to his console. We will require morphological modifiers to approximate humanoid appearances. We leave in 6 hours. As Zorp returned to his reading, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Galactic Union was sending them not just on a research mission, but into the very heart of human madness. The morphological modifier was not working properly. This was Zorp's first thought as he examined his reflection in the small device's display screen. While he now superficially resembled a human, with the appropriate number of limbs and facial features, there was something distinctly wrong about his appearance. His skin had the correct pinkish hue, but it stretched too tightly across his face. His expression, meant to be neutral, appeared rigid and intensely serious. The modifiers appear to be malfunctioning, he announced to his companions as they gathered in the shuttle's preparation chamber. Glix, now resembling a tall, exceptionally thin human with sharp features, merely shrugged. His expression was so blank, it almost appeared painted on. Functionality is adequate. Disguise meets minimum requirements. Borp was having the most difficulty. The modifier had given him the appearance of an extremely large human with disproportionately small facial features. His movements were clumsy as he adjusted to his new form, accidentally crushing a datapad in his massive hands. Sorry, the engineer rumbled, looking down at the broken technology. Zorp sighed, a human gesture he had practiced but which felt unnatural. The modifications will have to suffice. Remember our protocols. Observe, record, minimize direct interaction. Our translator implants should handle the language variations, but avoid complex discussion topics. They set the shuttle down in a designated landing area a moderate distance from the colony's main settlement. Proxima B7 was a recently established mining colony, primarily extracting rare minerals from the planet's unusual crust. The atmosphere was breathable but thin, giving the sky a perpetual reddish-purple hue. As they approached the settlement on foot, Zorp was already recording observations. The buildings were a haphazard mix of prefabricated units and improvised structures, some seemingly constructed from repurposed spacecraft parts. The streets, if one could call the unpaved pathway streets, were dusty and uneven. Inefficient design, Glix noted, no apparent urban planning. But creative, Borp added, gazing with interest at a dwelling that appeared to incorporate part of an old ship's hull as its roof. The sound reached them before they saw the establishment, a cacophony of voices, thumping music with a heavy percussive element, and the occasional sharp sound of breaking glass. A flickering neon sign, partially malfunctioning, identified the building as the Dusty Asteroid. "This is the location," Zorp confirmed, checking his disguised monitoring device. "Remember, we are here to observe only. Minimal interaction." They approached the swinging doors, an antiquated design choice that Zorp found baffling, and pushed into the establishment. The sensory assault was immediate and overwhelming. The air was thick with a complex mixture of odors: machinery lubricant, fried food, fermented beverages, and the distinctive musk of multiple species in close proximity. The lighting was inconsistent, too bright in some areas, nearly dark in others, with flickering neon signs and holographic advertisements creating a disorienting visual environment. The noise was worse. A version of what humans called space rock blared from speakers, competing with dozens of conversations at varying volumes. Someone was laughing with such force that Zorp worried they might be experiencing respiratory distress. In one corner, two miners appeared to be engaged in a heated argument, their voices rising above the general din. Sensory overload, Zorp murmured into his concealed recording device. Environment appears intentionally designed to overload cognitive processing. Possible explanation: humans seek to short-circuit logical thought processes to achieve altered state even before consuming intoxicants. They made their way to the bar counter, a long stretch of what appeared to be actual wood, a rarity in space colonies. Behind it stood a middle-aged human female with short gray hair, a face lined with experience, and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She was wiping a glass with a cloth, a gesture Zorp recognized from his research as a traditional bartender behavior. "What'll it be?" she asked as they approached, her tone neither friendly nor unfriendly, simply efficient. Zorp froze momentarily. They had not adequately prepared for direct interaction this quickly. He formulated what he believed to be an appropriate request. "I would like a fermented liquid that provides maximum cognitive alteration for minimum financial expenditure," he stated formally. The bartender, a small name tag, identified her as Sal, raised an eyebrow, but showed no other reaction. "House whiskey it is," she replied, reaching for a bottle filled with amber liquid. Glix ordered the same, while Borp requested something sweet, which resulted in a brightly colored concoction being placed before him. Drinks secured, the team awkwardly took their places at a table with a partial view of the room. Zorp noted that the seating arrangements were ergonomically unsound, with chairs that wobbled and tables at inconsistent heights. Commencing behavioral observation, Zorp murmured, scanning the room. Multiple human subtypes present, primarily mining personnel, identifiable by characteristic dust patterns on clothing and calloused hand structures. Some appear to be independent spacecraft operators. "You folks aren't from around here," a voice interrupted. Zorp looked up to see a human male, approximately 40 standard years in age, with a thick beard and arms covered in decorative ink patterns, tattoos, Zorp recalled from his research. "We are travelers," Zorp replied carefully, using the cover story they had prepared. "Visiting multiple colonies for business opportunities." The man grinned, showing a missing tooth. "Well, you picked a hell of a night to visit the Dusty. Friday nights, always lively." He thrust out his hand towards Zorp. "Name's Rourke. Run a loader crew at the North Basin." Zorp stared at the extended hand, recalling the human custom of physical contact as greeting. Hesitantly, he extended his own hand, which was immediately seized and pumped vigorously up and down. "Pleased to make your acquaintance," Zorp said stiffly, withdrawing his hand as soon as possible and discreetly wiping it on his clothing. "That's Fink over there," Rourke said, gesturing to another bearded man who was animatedly arguing with someone at the bar. "My partner. Don't mind him. He's just worked up about the Orbital Angels trading their best defender. Says it's going to ruin their gravity ball season." Zorp blinked, trying to process this information. "You disagree with this assessment?" Rourke snorted. "Course I do. The Angels' defense was shit all last season. They need to rebuild from the ground up. Fink's just sentimental about Korax. Because of that time, he signed his kid's hover boot." Zorp nodded, as though this made perfect sense, while making mental notes about apparent tribal affiliations formed around competitive physical activities. Across the room, a solitary figure sat in a corner, manipulating an instrument that appeared to be a hybrid of traditional string design and advanced synthesizer technology. The mournful sounds emanating from it cut through the general noise, creating what Zorp recognized as a melody, one that seemed purposefully designed to evoke emotional response. "Who is that individual?" Zorp asked, nodding toward the musician. "That's just old Jax," Rourke replied with a shrug. "Been playing that synth guitar since before they established the colony. Some say he was part of the original survey team, got injured and never left. Plays the best space blues this side of Alpha Centauri." Glix, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. The melody follows a mathematically predictable pattern while incorporating deliberate deviations to create emotional resonance. Efficiently designed for maximum impact. Rourke stared at Glix for a moment, then laughed. "I just like the way it sounds, friend. You talk funny, you know that." As Rourke wandered back to rejoin his argument with Fink, Zorp continued his observations, taking note of various human interactions. Two miners concluding what appeared to be a business transaction with a handshake and simultaneous consumption of alcoholic beverages. A group engaged in a game involving cards and small tokens, with regular exclamations of triumph or dismay. A pair of humans in one dark corner engaged in what his research identified as kissing, a bizarre practice of pressing oral orifices together. Post-labor dominance rituals, Zorp muttered into his recorder. Social bonding through controlled conflict and shared consumption of toxins. Mating behaviors conducted semi-publicly, possibly as status demonstrations. Borp, who had been quietly observing, leaned closer to Zorp. "They touch each other frequently," the disguised Grok noted with interest. "Shoulders, arms, backs, even when not performing formal greeting rituals." It was true. Zorp had noticed the constant physical contact, hands clapping backs, shoulders bumping, fingers tapping arms to emphasize points. The humans seemed to exist in a state of perpetual physical connection, their personal boundaries far more permeable than any logical species would permit. Possible explanation, tactile confirmation of social bonds, Zorp theorized. Alternative, sensory systems require regular recalibration through physical contact. Their observations were interrupted by a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. The general noise level dropped noticeably, conversations tapering off mid-sentence. The musician in the corner stopped playing, his fingers hovering silently over the strings. Zorp followed the collective gaze of the room's occupants to the entrance, where a group of newcomers stood silhouetted against the purple twilight outside. "Threat detected," Glix murmured, his Vorgan instincts immediately identifying the change in atmospheric tension. The newcomers moved into the light. There were 5 of them, dressed in mismatched armor and clothing that suggested salvage or theft rather than purchase. Each wore various weapons openly. Not the tools commonly carried by miners or engineers, but implements designed specifically for combat. Their leader was immediately apparent, a massive figure who appeared to be a hybrid of human and Zargonian ancestry, a rare combination. One eye was covered by a crude mechanical replacement, glowing faintly red in the dim light. Scars crisscrossed the visible portions of his face and arms. "Space pirates," Zorp whispered to his companions. Technically classified as independent salvage operators under frontier law, but engaged in illegal acquisition and black market trade. Scarface Clark, someone in the bar whispered loudly enough for them to hear. Thought he was operating in the Epsilon sector now. The atmosphere in the bar had transformed completely. The boisterous, chaotic energy had been replaced by a focused tension. Zorp noticed humans throughout the room shifting subtly, some moving hands closer to tools or weapons, others establishing eye contact with friends, still others edging toward exits. Sal, the bartender, continued wiping glasses as though nothing had changed, but Zorp noticed she had positioned herself near something under the bar counter, likely a weapon. Clark and his crew moved toward the bar, the crowd parting before them. The scarred captain's gaze swept the room, his mechanical eye whirring slightly as it adjusted focus. Well, he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. If it isn't the finest establishment on this dust ball of a colony. He leaned on the bar. Sal, darling, it's been too long. Not long enough, Clark, Sal replied, her expression unchanged but her posture subtly more rigid. Thought you'd been picked up by Union patrols after that business on Vegas Station. Clark laughed, a sound like metal scraping metal. Rumors of my incarceration have been greatly exaggerated. His mechanical eye swiveled, scanning the room until it fixed on something or someone. I see Rourke and Fink are still around. Still sore about our last transaction, boys. Across the room, Rourke and Fink had stopped their argument. They stood side by side now, their previous disagreement apparently forgotten in the face of common. What? Adversary? Threat? Zorp tried to analyze the situation using logical parameters. Clear resource or status dispute. He dictated quietly into his recorder, potentially escalating to non-ritualized violence. Historical grievance indicated. Yet something about the situation felt wrong to Zorp. It wasn't following any of the conflict resolution patterns he had studied. There was an undercurrent he couldn't quantify, something in the way humans throughout the room were positioning themselves, making eye contact, communicating without words. We should depart, Glick suggested quietly. Conflict probability increasing. Mission parameters did not include combat scenarios. I am concerned for Sal, Borp rumbled softly, and the small human behind her. Zorp hadn't noticed before, but there was indeed a younger human, possibly an adolescent, visible through a doorway behind the bar. We maintain observation only, Zorp insisted, though he felt an unfamiliar sensation in his modified form, a tightness in the chest, an acceleration of breath. Was this anxiety? Was the human morphological modifier affecting his cognitive functions? Across the room, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Clark had moved away from the bar and was now standing uncomfortably close to Rourke and Fink. You know why I'm here, the pirate captain was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent bar. The Union patrol schedules you sold me were wrong. Cost me a ship and 3 crew members. We sold you what we had, Rourke replied, his voice steady but tense. Not our fault if the Union changed their routes. I think you set me up, Clark countered, his hand moving to rest on a nasty-looking blade at his hip. And Clark doesn't like being set up. Nobody set you up, Fink interjected. Union's been changing patrol patterns because of increased piracy. Almost like someone's been hitting too many ships in the sector. His tone made it clear who that someone might be. Clark's face darkened. One of his crew, a wiry human with augmented arms, moved closer to Fink. Zorp was fascinated despite himself. This was precisely the kind of irrational conflict escalation he had studied in human historical records. A dispute based on incomplete information, progressing toward violence despite the availability of numerous nonviolent resolution options. And yet, there was something else happening too. Around the room, other humans were moving with purpose now. A miner had picked up a heavy wrench. The card players had palmed small objects that might have been weapons. Old Jax, the musician, had set down his instrument and picked up what appeared to be a bottleneck broken to form a jagged edge. Unexpected collective response, Zorp murmured. Evidence of group cohesion despite no formal organizational structure. The tension broke when Clark's associate shoved Fink hard, sending him stumbling backward into a table. Drinks crashed to the floor. In the next instant, chaos erupted. It wasn't a coordinated fight, not in any sense that Zorp could categorize. It was pure, magnificent chaos. Clark's crew had drawn weapons, but they were immediately engaged from multiple directions. Sal had indeed had something under the bar, not a weapon, but a massive wrench that she wielded with surprising skill. Rourke had tackled the pirate who had shoved Fink, while Fink himself had recovered and was grappling with another. Tables overturned. Bottles flew through the air. Someone had activated an emergency lighting protocol, causing the overhead lights to pulse red and white, adding to the disorienting scene. "We should leave immediately," Glick stated, rising from his seat. His timing was unfortunate. A human was thrown backward by an impact and collided directly with the disguised Vorgan, sending both crashing to the floor. Zorp stood, intending to help his crew member, when a large figure stumbled into him, one of Clark's pirates. The alien researcher found himself sprawled on the floor, his recording device sliding away across the sticky surface. "You're with them," the pirate snarled, apparently mistaking Zorp for an ally of Rourke and Fink. The man raised a fist. Time seemed to slow for Zorp. His Ilosian mind raced through options, calculations, probabilities. None of his training had prepared him for direct involvement in human conflict. He should remain passive, avoid engagement, protect his cover identity at all costs. Yet in that moment, something unexpected happened in Zorp's highly logical mind. He experienced what humans might call an epiphany, a sudden, intuitive leap of understanding that transcended his methodical analysis. This wasn't just chaos. This wasn't just madness. There was a pattern here, an underlying logic to the apparent insanity. The humans in this bar, strangers, acquaintances, even rivals like Rourke and Fink, had united instantly against a common threat, not through planning or hierarchy or formal alliance, but through some innate, collective understanding. Without conscious decision, Zorp found himself rolling to the side, dodging the pirate's blow. "Warp! Glicks!" he called out, abandoning protocol. Defensive pattern. The massive disguised grok had already taken action. When another of Clark's crew attempted to flank Sal, Warp had simply been in the way. His enormous frame, seemingly accidentally, had blocked the pirate's path. When the frustrated man attempted to push past, Borp had apologetically stumbled, somehow managing to send the pirate crashing into a wall. Glix, recovering from his fall, moved with the precision and efficiency typical of his species. He didn't directly engage anyone, but somehow managed to be in exactly the right place to cause maximum disruption to the pirates. A foot extended at just the right moment to trip one, a slight push to redirect another into the path of a swinging fist meant for someone else. Zorp, to his own astonishment, found himself analyzing the fight not as an observer, but as a participant. He noticed patterns in the chaos, the way certain pirates favored particular attacks, vulnerable points in their stances, moments when they were off balance. The large one overextends after throwing a right hook, he called to Rourke, who glanced at him in surprise before using the information to sidestep his opponent's attack and land a solid counterblow. The fight continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Despite being outnumbered, Clark's crew was steadily losing ground. The pirates were fighting as individuals. The bar patrons, despite their lack of coordination, were somehow functioning as a unit, warning each other of threats, creating openings, protecting those who fell. The climax came when Clark himself, having been driven back toward the bar, made a lunge for Sal. The bartender, prepared, swung her massive wrench, but Clark was faster than he looked. He dodged the blow and grabbed for her throat. He never made contact. Three things happened simultaneously. Borp's massive frame accidentally bumped into Clark from behind, causing him to stumble forward. Glix's foot slid precisely into position where Clark was about to step, causing him to lose balance. And Zorp, acting on pure intuition, called out, "Sal, counter-rotation." The bartender didn't hesitate. She pivoted in the direction opposite to Clark's stumble, adding momentum to his fall while removing herself from his reach. The pirate captain crashed face-first into the bar with tremendous force. When he slumped to the floor, his mechanical eye was sparking and a trickle of blood ran from his organic one. A strange silence fell over the bar, broken only by heavy breathing and the occasional groan from injured combatants. Clark's remaining conscious crew looked at their fallen leader, then at the united front of bar patrons facing them. Without a word, they backed toward the exit. "Don't bother coming back," Sal called after them as they dragged Clark's semi-conscious form out the door. "And tell your boss his credit's no good here either." The moment the doors swung shut behind the pirates, something remarkable happened. The tension didn't just decrease, it transformed. The silence erupted into laughter, cheers, and animated conversation. People who had been trying to injure each other minutes before were now helping injured patrons to chairs, clapping others on the back, comparing minor wounds with something approaching pride. Rourke approached Borp and slapped the disguised Grok's massive shoulder with obvious approval. "Not bad for a tourist," he grinned. "You've got a mean right block." Sal nodded to Zorp from behind the bar, a gesture that somehow conveyed both gratitude and respectful acknowledgement. She turned to address the room. "Next round's half price, but anybody who broke furniture is paying for it." This announcement was met with more cheers and good-natured complaints. Impossibly, music started up again. Old Jax had returned to his corner and was playing something with a lively, triumphant tempo. Zorp stood in the middle of the recovering bar, his logical mind struggling to process what he had just experienced. Humans had just engaged in potentially lethal combat, and now they were celebrating, laughing, acting as though nothing of significance had occurred. More baffling still, Zorp, senior xenosociologist, dedicated to logical analysis and non-intervention, had participated, had felt something, had understood, if only for a moment, the inexplicable human ability to form instant community in the face of chaos. The low wail of colony security sirens could be heard approaching outside. Patrons quickly established a collective narrative. Clark and his crew had started trouble. The bar had defended itself. Simple as that. No one mentioned the three strangers who had played peculiar but pivotal roles in the confrontation. As security officers entered to take statements, Zorp, Glix, and Borp gradually made their way toward the exit. Their disguises were intact, though Zorp's was now sporting a torn sleeve and what would become a fascinating bruise. Before they could leave, Sal approached them, wiping her hands on a towel. "You folks aren't from around here," she said quietly. "An observation, not a question." "We are travelers," Zorp replied, using their cover story again. Sal's eyes, sharp and knowing, studied each of them in turn. "Sure you are," she said finally. "Whatever you are, you stepped up when it counted." She glanced back at the bar, where her young assistant was already sweeping up broken glass. "That matters around here. Why did you do it?" Zorp found himself asking, genuine curiosity overriding caution. Engage in physical conflict? You could have been severely injured. It was irrational. Sal seemed to consider the question seriously. "Clark deserved what he got," she said simply. "Been preying on honest transports for months. As for why everyone jumped in," she shrugged. "You got to protect your own place, you know? Your people. Even if you only met them an hour ago over a drink." Sal returned to her bar, leaving Zorp with an answer that was no answer at all by Xylosian standards, and yet, somehow, made perfect sense. Outside, in the cool night air of Proxima B7, the research team regrouped. Their morphological modifiers were beginning to fluctuate after the exertion, meaning they needed to return to their shuttle soon. Mission parameters were compromised, Glix stated flatly, though Zorp noticed the Vorgan pilot seemed less rigid than usual. "We engaged directly with the subjects. I liked helping Sal," Borp said, his modified face attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Felt good, right?" Zorp was silent for a long moment, looking back at the bar. The sounds of music and laughter were audible again, as if the violent encounter had been nothing but a momentary interruption. "I have been approaching this entire research project incorrectly," he finally said. "I've been trying to apply logical frameworks to human behavior, searching for patterns based on efficiency and rationality." He began walking toward their shuttle, his colleagues falling in beside him. "But I think I understand now. Human irrationality isn't a flaw in their species design. It's a feature, an evolutionary adaptation to a chaotic universe." His pace quickened with his excitement. "Think about it. Their apparent madness creates unpredictability, which makes them adaptable. Their emotional volatility allows them to form instant, intense bonds with strangers when necessary. Their illogical attachment to concepts like fairness and home gives them strength that cold logic cannot explain. Blix, to Zorp's surprise, nodded slightly. Their combat technique was inefficient, but effective. They adapted to changing conditions without a command structure. They feel strongly, Borp added. It makes them stronger, not weaker. As they reached their shuttle, Zorp paused for one last look at the colony, at the flickering neon sign of the dusty asteroid barely visible in the distance. My report to the Galactic Union will challenge everything we thought we knew about humans, he said, feeling a strange mix of scientific excitement and something else, something almost like respect. To understand them, we can't just observe. We have to participate in their beautiful, terrifying chaos. He entered the shuttle, already formulating the first draft of his report in his mind. But alongside the scientific analysis, another thought kept recurring. Perhaps, for purely research purposes of course, he should return to the dusty asteroid. He'd heard mentions of something called karaoke night that sounded particularly promising for studying human social bonding rituals. And he still hadn't properly analyzed the neurological effects of what humans called spicy food. For science, of course,